How fun was that? Man, I wish I was a musician. Yeah, that's cool. Well, we're continuing with our study of the Gospel of Mark. I've entitled our message today, "Who do you say that I am?" Mark chapter 8. I think this chapter is all about Jesus' identity. Who Jesus is. You know, identity matters. You can't tell by just looking at someone to determine who they are, what their nationality is. These days, people talk about undocumented people. Well, you can't tell by looking at someone whether they're documented or undocumented. Well, as a foreigner, being the same race as the colonists who were in Congo, when I was in Congo, I was heavily documented. And you had better have your documents with you when you traveled. And there were multiple redundant documents, and they would change with every leader that would come along. We would sometimes be interrogated as criminals just because we were a different race and people didn't know about us. Who are you? Where'd you come from? State your purpose. Where are you going? What are you doing here? As a foreigner, I was sometimes a threat to the leader's authority. Sometimes people would approach me angrily, but their demeanor would change as they learned who I really was. And I wasn't what they may have expected me to be. And sometimes I get angry with the officials, or people who claim to be officials, because sometimes they were undocumented, and they would ask me for my documents, or they weren't in uniform, and they would ask me to identify myself. And sometimes when you question someone, well, who are you? They would go to their partner and get a piece of identity and come and show it. And they were sharing documents among themselves. But this guy's my friend, Serge. His father was a local government authority who we were good friends with, who took care of me. And Serge, he was a real policeman. And he would check up on us regularly. It was always fun, a good thing to be with Serge, an official, because he wouldn't just check my documents, because he knew who I was. And we'd lived together and we interacted together. Well, 2,000 years ago, everyone was wondering who this man Jesus was. What was his purpose? Do we back him or don't we? And the identity of Jesus matters. It matters then, it matters now. And who Jesus is affects us every day of our lives, even unto eternity. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' identity is in transition. Up to this point, Jesus is the carpenter, a miracle worker, a teacher. But chapter 8 is sometimes called the middle passage, because Jesus is going from miracle worker to martyr. And the next slide is a brief outline of where we're going to go this morning in chapter 8. We're attempting in this study to get an overview of the gospel. So we're not going to be diving deep in one particular passage. So we want to look at a little bit about the feeding of the 4,000, then the confrontation with the Pharisees, and then Jesus' disappointment with the disciples. Healing of a blind man. Jesus speaks about his identity and the implications of following Jesus. So verses 1 through 9 is the feeding of the 4,000, and it's kind of like déjà vu, because in chapter 6 we saw the feeding of the 5,000. And here we have another feeding of a great multitude. And we see Jesus here in action. He's in control as he summons the disciples and he directs the multitude. And people have come far and wide and stayed for 3 days to hear Jesus talk. And Jesus has compassion on the crowd. Well, what if they faint on their way going back to the villages? And I'm sure by feeding the people recognize the story of another time when their ancestors were hungry in the wilderness. And another prophet fed them on a type of bread, manna, and a protein, the quail. And here was another prophet in the order of Moses, feeding them again on bread and protein. And what's interesting to me about this passage, in verse 6, he says, "And taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, and he broke them, and began giving them to the disciples, to serve them, and to serve the multitude." And what does that remind you of? Reminds you of the Lord's Supper. That's the formula that Jesus used at the Lord's Supper. So here you've got a whole multitude being fed. And I wonder, later on when the Lord's Supper was instituted, if people thought, oh yeah, remember that time when we were with Jesus in person and he fed us. And he fed us with the bread of life. And Jesus is the bread of life. And you know what? There's enough of Jesus to go around with baskets left over. To the multitude, Jesus was a miracle worker who provided for an immediate need. A teacher worth listening to for 3 days. And to some, he was a healer. And then the next few verses 10 through 15, it's an argument, kind of an argument, that Jesus had with the Pharisees. Verse 10 to 15. "And immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him." Don't you just see the belligerence of the Pharisees there? They didn't come to ask questions, to learn, but they came out with the intention of just arguing. Come on, Jesus, prove who you are. Show us your identification. To the Pharisees, Jesus was a threat to their authority, to their theology, their way of life. Jesus presented opposition to their understanding of how to approach God. And so they're traveling along, and later in the day, Jesus is still thinking about his encounter with the Pharisees. Because in verse 15 he says, "And he was giving orders to them, saying, 'Watch out! Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod.'" It's like Jesus was still thinking about it, processing his argument with the Pharisees. So what does he mean by the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod? Well, leaven in the Bible often represents sin. So the Pharisees' sin was hypocrisy and empty rituals. And Herod's sin is a preoccupation with worldliness, with wealth, with prestige, maybe with honor and power. Leaven, it works over time, kind of in secret, and it contaminates the whole body, the whole loaf of bread. And in the end, everything is contaminated. And in this case, it's contaminated in the wrong way. It's ruined. And so Jesus, he had figured the Pharisees out. He knew who they were, but they hadn't quite figured Jesus out yet. And they weren't open to truly finding out who he was. Always confrontation. And then in verse 16 to 21, we see Jesus with his disciples, and Jesus kind of expressing disappointment with his disciples. Verse 16 says, and he began to discuss with one another, and they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. They were in the boat, traveling after all the preaching, and they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of bread did you pick up? And they said to him, 12. And when he broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, do you not yet understand? Imagine the scene. They've just been preaching for 3 days. There's a lot going on, a lot to process. And the disciples, instead of thinking about what Jesus had been teaching and about how to be a learner, how to be a disciple, they were preoccupied with who was it that forgot to bring dinner? There's only 1 loaf of bread. What are we going to do? Here they had Jesus with them, and it was a time when they could debrief, when they could process, because they didn't have Jesus to them by themselves very often. This was a chance to be with Jesus and to hear from him. And they're preoccupied and distracted about what they don't have. They had the bread of life with them, but they're concerned about something to eat. And so Jesus says, don't you remember? Haven't you seen the bread multiplied? Haven't you seen the deaf hear, the blind see? Don't you remember anything? It's kind of, again, a note of exasperation. Has the seed fallen on the ground and the birds come and plucked it out? Don't you get it yet? Don't you know why I'm taking you on this discipleship adventure? Or is this adventure just a distraction? But the question is left hanging because they reach the shore. And already there's a crowd there waiting for Jesus. And they lost their chance to be with Jesus and to debrief with him. And so we have verse 22 to 26, this strange encounter with a blind man. Verse 22. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him, and entreated him to just touch him. And taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he said to him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men, for I'm seeing them like trees walking about. And then again he, Jesus, laid his hands upon his eyes, and he looked intently, and he was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. What a strange situation here. In the past, when someone was in need of healing, just Jesus' word healed the person. You know, people understood that all Jesus needed to say was to be healed, and someone far away could be healed. Or someone would come and touch the fringe of his garment and be healed. And they brought this blind man to Jesus to touch him. And Jesus not only touched him, but took him by the hand. And he wasn't healed. And Jesus walked with him. And as they walked, the man wasn't healed. And they went outside of the village, and Jesus touched his eyes. And you know what? He wasn't healed all the way. Did Jesus get the formula wrong? And Jesus touches him again. And finally, he sees clearly. Why did Mark put this story right in here in the middle of chapter 8? Just after Jesus had been asking the disciples, don't you see yet? It's kind of like, it's okay if we begin to see gradually. We may not see everything all at once. It may not come to us all at once. But as long as we're walking with Jesus and wanting to learn from Jesus and keep our eyes open, he can bring healing and he can bring wholeness. Jesus doesn't work just one way all the time, but Jesus is so great that he can work any which way. And finally, he sees clearly. And this sets us up for, okay, the disciples aren't seeing really clear yet. And Jesus says, okay, we're going to take a hike. And I'm going to show you something. And hopefully you'll be able to see clearly now. And so Jesus takes the disciples to a place called Caesarea Philippi. It's a beautiful place. And Rita and I, our family, visited this place, Caesarea Philippi. It's on the foothills of Mount Hermon. And you see that cliff there, and to the left there's a cave, and water used to come gushing out of there. That's the headwaters of the Jordan River. And throughout antiquity, people recognized this as a sacred spot. The historian Josephus said that the area was full of statues of the gods. There was a shrine to Pan, and it was considered one of Greece's greatest shrines, situated in this grotto, this cave that you can see to the left in the picture that I took. And Pan was revered by the ancient Greeks as the god of isolated rural areas, of music, of goat herds, of hunting, of sexual and spiritual possession, of victory in battle, and so on. So if you came and sacrificed to Pan, you could pretty much get anything that your passions desired. And later Philip, one of the sons of Herod, made a statue and a temple dedicated to Caesar Augustus. And so the place is named Caesarea Philippi, after Caesar, Caesarea, and Philippi, Philip Herod, who also had a temple, a shrine there. So Philip, by honoring the emperor, he thought, boy, I'm going to get something too politically by honoring the emperor. It was all about what you can get for yourself. Thus, when Jesus and his disciples traveled to this pagan place, Caesarea Philippi, they saw a city filled with statues, temples, shrines to foreign gods. In this place, they honored false gods who walk among men, and a man, Caesar, who thinks he's God. It was the visible representation of idolatrous worship and the supposed power of these deities. And this is one of the places where Satan was worshipped, and where people believed that they could receive gifts from Satan: riches, honor, power, and strength. And perhaps Jesus was remembering his own temptation from Satan, who told Jesus that if you only bow down and worship me, I'll give you the kingdoms and the glory of the world. You honored these deities so that you could get something. In Congo, people know that you can gain success from visiting the house of the sorcerer. But the success, it always comes with a cost. And usually it's the death of a family member. Thus Jesus chose Caesarea Philippi, the epitome of paganism, as the backdrop to declare something important. Look at all these statues of powerful people that images that people seek after. Here's a shrine to Caesar. Here's to Herod. But you, what am I in this place? How do I fit into the picture? And so, there at Philippi, our passage says, Jesus went out with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he questioned his disciples, saying, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "John the Baptist, others say you're Elijah, others say you're prophets." And so Jesus learned what the population thought about him. And then Jesus says, "Okay, that's cool, but you, who do people say, who do you say that I am?" Verse 29. And Peter answered and said to him, "Thou art the Christ." Christ is the same word for Messiah. One is Greek, the other is Hebrew. It's the anointed one. The one that has been prophesied by all the Hebrew prophets. The other Gospels, the synoptics, they add more to Peter's answer, or to Jesus' answer to Peter's confession of faith. But we want to focus on Mark's message, not on what the whole of the synoptics teach us. Here in Mark, the focus is on the Christ, not on Peter, as the part about the durability of the church. Jesus explains what Christ really means here, because their understanding of the Messiah was something completely different. They believed in a conquering Messiah in the order of the shrines that were there behind them. They weren't seeing yet. They weren't hearing clearly yet. To be a conquering Messiah, as they hoped, Jesus would have only been. So if they had made Jesus into a conquering Messiah, Jesus would only have been a chapter in history. Someone who is useful for that moment in time among those people. Jesus could have been Jesus the Great, as in Herod the Great, or Alexander the Great. People who ruled for a short time, but after that were conquered and someone else took over. That's what they thought Jesus was going to be. Someone who was going to be a ruler and was going to chase out the Romans. But that would have been just for a limited period of time. And so Jesus explains to them something different. Here's what the Christ really means. And Jesus says, and he began to teach them, verse 30, and he warned them to tell no one about him. He's accepting that he is the Christ. And he began to teach them that, verse 31, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And so Jesus is identifying himself as the Son of Man. To find out what that meant, we have to look at Daniel, the prophecy of Daniel. Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 verse 13 says, "I kept looking in the night vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days," symbolic for the appearance of God, "and was presented before him," presented before God. And verse 14 of Daniel says, And to him was given dominion and honor and a kingdom, so that all the peoples, all the nations, we can go to the next slide because I have it written down, all the populations of all languages might serve him. His dominion, it's an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. All these others who are here, their kingdoms were destroyed. They passed away. Their kingdoms passed away. But Jesus' kingdom, Jesus is the Son of Man who is coming in the clouds and who is given this authority and this title and this prophecy about him. So Jesus is identifying himself with that figure that's going to come in the end times and gather everybody up. But something must happen before he's glorified. And verse 31 continues and says, the Son of Man must suffer. He must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter was shocked by this language. And Peter rebukes Jesus. Get with the program, Jesus. You have the backing of the crowd. It's your turn to shine. Come on, we want to find our places next to you. We want to gain from this too. This is a historical hour that needs to be seized. Come on, we're all for you. And Peter rebukes Jesus, and Jesus then rebukes Peter. Get behind me, Satan. Satan means adversary, the one who opposes God's plan. Because Satan, he didn't want Jesus to succeed in being the Redeemer of all mankind. If Jesus would have gone for the momentary glory, he would have failed in his ultimate mission, although he would have been Jesus the Great. And Jesus tells Peter to focus on God's greater purpose, rather than just what you want, Peter. It's not about what you want, but there's a greater purpose that you can be a part of. Don't follow your own self-interest, but follow me. This is what discipleship is all about. Denying oneself. If you want life, then follow me. And so by describing his future crucifixion and resurrection in Caesarea Philippi, Jesus refocused his disciples away from misunderstanding about the Messiah as a political liberator towards comprehending his identity as the Redeemer of all mankind. And so what are the implications of Jesus being the Christ? Well, it seems like word was leaking out that Jesus was saying that he was the Christ, although the population hadn't heard it directly from Jesus yet. So what does he do? In verse 34, he gathers the people together. Before he was saying, don't tell anybody, keep it a secret. But now it's the time for the great reveal. He gathers everybody together. He gathers the disciples together. And he says, okay guys, this is it. This is my identity. Look, you've been following me all over this area, from one side of the sea to the other. You've followed me so that I can be your provider, your healer, your teacher, and maybe a prophet. But now I want you to know that I'm more than just a miracle worker. But Jesus says he's the Christ, the one that was spoken of by the prophets. And the people, they're beginning to see in increments, just like the blind man. And Jesus was telling them that the selfish prosperity some of them had been pursuing by going to those temples and those shrines, it isn't what they should be satisfied with. There was more. There's more to life. Jesus is asking, are you seeing now? All these monuments, they can satisfy the desires of your heart, but it's only temporary. It's only a temporary earthly honor. I'm the one who can save your souls. Consider the long term rather than the short term. And in verse 34, Jesus says, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Jesus is warning them, if you really want to keep on following me, to be part of the kingdom, it's not about what you're going to get, but what you're willing to give up. Whose kingdom do you want to be a part of? A kingdom that rises and falls like Caesar's and Herod's? Or an everlasting kingdom? Take up your cross. Deny yourself. Follow Jesus. A little testimony about myself. From an early age, I dedicated my life to Jesus. And in my formative years, I was really searching for how God wanted to use my life. So I went to college and I didn't feel like the Lord wanted me at college. So I dropped out of college and went into the army, of all things. I thought that would be a way of really denying myself, taking up my cross. And it was. Because I didn't go along with the crowd. And I still wanted to be a Christian, even though I was in a pagan, secular environment. I was really seeking the Lord. What Lord do you want of me? And at one point, I really wanted to be a helicopter pilot. I thought that'd be really cool. You get to be an officer, you get status, you get prestige. And so I took the test to become the aptitude test for being a pilot. And I passed, and I did really well. And I was ready to go to flight school. And about that time, the Lord said, no, that's not where I want you. It's not about what you want. It's not about yourself, the status and the rank and the prestige. No, I want you to go to seminary. And I want you to become a missionary and go to Africa. Well, going to Africa with a young family, that's certainly taking up your cross and following Jesus. But it worked out well for us. We were giving up a lot of things. The no McDonald's in Africa. A lot of, you can't watch the Super Bowl. All the fun things that we do here in America. You can't do that by being a missionary in Africa. But it worked well for us. And there were others here who stood with us, like the mission partnership team here at Santa Cruz Community Church that stood with us while we were missionaries to enable us to be missionaries. And even though I didn't get to be an army pilot, you know what? I got to be a pilot in Africa, which was way more exciting than anything any helicopter pilots experience. So it all worked out well for me by the grace of God, even though we're willing to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow Jesus. But following Jesus can be dangerous too, like it was for the disciples in the first century. Like it was for 70 Christians in Congo 10 days ago who were beheaded by Islamists because of their faith. That was only this month. 70 people beheaded because of their faith. An experience that motivated many missionaries to go into missions. It was an event that happened in 1956. And there were 5 young missionaries in South America who lost their lives because they wanted to take the gospel to a particular tribe. And so Susan Martins Miller, in her book entitled Jim Elliot, Missionary to Ecuador, gives a quote from Jim Elliot, one of those missionaries, which he wrote during his years at Wheaton College. And Jim Elliot said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. What does it matter if we gain the whole world but still lose our souls? It doesn't matter what we achieve in life if we're not connected to the one who is life himself. Jesus asks us, as he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Who is Jesus to you? Do you think Jesus is whom he says he is? Are we beginning to see? Are we seeing clearly? If he is all that he says he is, then we must follow him. Have you acknowledged Jesus as Christ? Or is just someone who you go to when you need something? Is he king of your life? Your master? And the last verse of this chapter compels us to take a stand for Jesus. Verse 38 says, "For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." As Baptists, we believe that baptism is a way of standing up and declaring before people that we're not ashamed of the gospel, that we aren't ashamed of our Lord. Baptism is the way that we announce that we are following Jesus. It's a way that we show that we're dying to ourselves and we're resurrected to live with Christ. At Easter time, we hope to once again fill the baptistry, because Nueva Vida is going to have a baptism. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a baptism too? Maybe you've never dedicated your life to Christ. Maybe you've never made a public profession of your faith and say, "Lord, I'm not ashamed of you. I want to stand up for you. I know that I need to give myself to you if I want to experience life and have it more abundantly." We would love to talk with you if you'd want to be baptized at Easter time. Jesus, he went to the cross to give us a life that is eternal, everlasting in the kingdom of God. Jesus wants us to take up our crosses too. But you know what? Our crosses carry no merit in themselves. They can't save us. Our crosses can't save us. Whatever we give up, that's not earning anything. But the cross that we carry is a life of discipleship. Discipleship is surrendering ourselves to Jesus and desiring to live as he requires, to follow in his steps. You know, we can't all be missionaries. We're not all blessed with musical talent or attractive personalities. But we can all deny ourselves in some way and take up our cross to follow Jesus. And you're already doing that by being at church today instead of on the beach. Making the effort to gather together, it's a wonderful way to take up our cross and to follow him. And you know what? The church, it needs a new generation of Christ followers. We need the young. We haven't been reaching the young very well. If all you can do is pray, if all you can do is just stay home and pray, it would be a wonderful thing to plead for the Lord of the harvest to bring in souls into his kingdom. It's a way that you can take up your cross and follow Jesus, even from your home. I'd like to invite the musicians to come forward, to take their places as we prepare to sing "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." One of Isaac Watts' 600 hymns that he wrote more than 300 years ago. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour content on all my pride.